I didn't pack a single bag. I didn't call anyone. I just sat in my kitchen with my coffee going cold and thought, so this is how it ends. Not with a fight, not with screaming. With a manila envelope slid under my bathroom door. I'll get back to that. My name is Cecile. I'm 63 years old. I live in Greensboro, North Carolina, and for 31 years I worked as a paralegal for a mid-sized family law firm downtown. I know what legal documents look like. I know what they mean. I know exactly how far someone can push before they've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. That knowledge is the only reason I still have my house. My husband, Robert, passed 7 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end, and I was with him every single day of it. After he died, I did what a lot of women my age do. I kept going. You don't have the luxury of falling apart when there are utility bills and a mortgage and a yard that needs mowing whether you feel like it or not. Robert and I had built something together, a 1,940 square foot house in a quiet neighborhood, paid off 3 years before he got sick. That was the plan we'd always had. Own it free and clear before we got old. We made it. So when he was gone, I had that, at least. I had the house. I have one son. His name is Miles. He's 34. I raised him mostly on my own during the years Robert was building the business. When Robert was gone 5 days out of 7, and I was the one doing the school pickups and the teacher conferences and the weekend soccer games. Miles and I were close, the way mothers and sons are close when it's just the two of them most of the time. I thought we understood each other. He met his wife, Adrienne, about 5 years ago at a work conference in Charlotte. She's from Connecticut, originally. One of those small towns near the shore where everyone went to private school and talks about it a lot. She worked in marketing. She was sharp. I'll give her that. Polished. The kind of woman who remembers what you were wearing the first time you met and somehow uses it against you later. I want to be fair. In the beginning, I tried. I had them over for Sunday dinners. I sent birthday cards. When Miles told me she didn't eat pork, I learned to cook around it. I adjusted. That's what you do. The wedding was 3 years ago. Small ceremony outside Raleigh. Nice enough. I helped pay for the rehearsal dinner. I wore a dusty blue dress that Adrienne had specifically requested, not navy. Cecile, navy photographs, dark, and I smiled in every single photograph. For about a year and a half after the wedding, things were fine. Not warm, exactly, but functional. They lived 40 minutes away in an apartment in Durham. Miles called on Sundays. We did holidays together. It was a life. Then the layoffs happened. Miles worked in tech operations for a logistics company. When the company reorganized in the spring, his whole department was eliminated. 300 people. He wasn't singled out. It wasn't a firing, but it didn't matter. The paycheck stopped. Adrienne's marketing job was freelance by that point, project-based, which meant when the projects dried up, they really dried up. Within 2 months, they were burning through savings. Within 4 months, they asked if they could stay with me. Just until we get back on our feet, Mom. Probably 3 months, maybe 4. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He's my son. I want to say that out loud, clearly, so nobody thinks I'm a woman who didn't try. I said yes. I meant it, and I set up the guest bedroom with fresh linens and cleared out half the hall closet and stocked the refrigerator with things I knew they liked. I told Miles, my home is your home for as long as you need. I should not have used that exact phrase. They moved in on a Saturday in June. By Sunday evening, Adrienne was walking through the house with her phone out, taking photographs. I thought maybe she was sending pictures to her mother. People do that. Look where we're staying. I let it go. By the end of the first week, she had rearranged the items on my kitchen counter. The toaster had moved, the small ceramic rooster I keep near the window. It had been a gift from Robert's mother, who had passed the year before he did, was on the highest shelf of the pantry, where I couldn't reach it without a step stool. I brought it back down. I didn't say anything about it. Miles was job hunting seriously. I'll give him that. He was on his laptop most mornings, sending out applications, doing phone screens. He seemed embarrassed about the situation in a way that I found both heartbreaking and reassuring, like he hadn't forgotten who he was or where he came from. Adrian, on the other hand, seemed to be settling in. She started commenting on the house, not cruelly at first. Have you ever thought about doing an open concept layout? And this wallpaper is so charming, very vintage. The way she said vintage made it clear she didn't mean it as a compliment. My wallpaper is a soft cream with a thin ivy pattern. Robert and I chose it together in 1998. I like it. About 3 weeks in, she came to me in the living room while I was reading and said, very calmly, that she was having trouble sleeping because of the smell of the food I cooked. I make a slow-cooked collard greens and smoked turkey dish that I've been making since before Miles was born. My neighbor Betty says the smell drifts over to her yard, and she considers it a public service. But Adrian said the smell was intense, and it was getting into the bedroom, and she'd appreciate it if I could cook it when they were out of the house. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "I'll keep that in mind, sweetheart." That was the moment I started paying attention differently. I began noticing things I'd explained away before. She had started sorting the mail before I got to it. Not taking anything, just organizing it, she said when I mentioned it. She had added a Bluetooth speaker to the living room without asking. She'd replaced a hand soap in the guest bathroom with a brand I hadn't bought. Small things. Individually, nothing. But I've worked in family law for 3 decades. I have watched people establish dominance in shared spaces. I know what it looks like when someone is quietly, methodically making themselves at home in a way that goes beyond being a guest. One evening in July, I came home from having dinner with my friend Betty and found Adrian at the kitchen table with a legal pad covered in notes. She closed it quickly when I walked in. I asked if everything was all right. She said she was just journaling. I knew what a legal pad looked like when someone was making lists. It wasn't journaling. The next day, while she was out, Miles and I sat on the back porch. I asked him how he was really doing. He said he had 2 strong leads. He seemed hopeful. Then he said, almost like he was mentioning the weather, "Adrian thinks it might make more sense in the long run if we just, if we helped you manage the property. Since we're here anyway." I kept my face neutral. "Manage the property how, Miles?" He got a little vague. Something about finances, about efficiency, about how it might be easier on me as I got older. That phrase, "as you get older." He was 34 years old, sitting on my porch, and he was talking to me about getting older. I said, "I appreciate the thought. Let me think about it." I went inside and called my attorney, a woman named Louise I'd worked alongside for 20 years. I told her what was happening. She asked a few questions, and then she said, very evenly, "Cecile, you need to document everything starting right now." I already had my phone out. For the next 2 weeks, I kept notes, dates, times, what was said. I photographed the ceramic rooster on the high shelf. I noted when the mail was sorted. I noticed that Adrian had removed a framed photo of Robert and me from the hallway. It was in the linen closet, face down. I put it back without comment. Miles got one of the job offers. A good one. A company in Greensboro, actually, which meant they didn't need to move to another city. He told me over dinner, and I was genuinely happy for him. I thought things would start to shift. I thought they'd begin looking for an apartment. They didn't mention moving. Not that week. Not the next. I finally brought it up in August, gently, asking if they'd had a chance to look at apartments now that the income situation had changed. Adrian said the rental market was brutal right now, and they were being strategic. Miles looked at his plate. That night, I lay in my own bed in my own house and stared at the ceiling and thought about what I was going to do. What I decided was this. I would give it until the 1st of September. If they had not produced a move-out plan by then, I would have Louise send a formal notice. I didn't want it to come to that. I still don't like that it came to what it did come to. But I had a timeline in my head, and that helped me get out of bed every morning. September 1st came and went. I had the conversation with Miles on September 3rd. I told him, clearly and calmly, that I needed them to give me a move-out date. Not a plan, not a "we're working on it," an actual date. He said they needed a little more time. Adrian, from across the room, said something about how this arrangement has actually been working really well for everyone. I said, I'd like a date, Miles. He said the 1st of November. I said that was acceptable. Adrian said, without looking up from her phone, we'll see. I don't know if she meant for me to hear it. I chose to pretend I hadn't. October was the longest month of my life. Adrian had stopped pretending to be agreeable. She ran the dishwasher at 11 at night, which she knew I disliked. She had friends over one Saturday afternoon without telling me, and I came home to 4 strangers in my living room eating cheese off one of my good plates. She started leaving her car in the middle of the driveway in a way that blocked me in, and when I mentioned it, she apologized very sweetly and did it again 3 days later. I held on. I called Louise twice. I kept my notes. Then, on the morning of October 21st, 11 days before the date Miles had given me, I came downstairs at 7 in the morning to take my walk, and my house key didn't work. I stood at my own front door, in my own neighborhood, in my house coat, and turned my key in my lock, and it turned halfway and stopped. I tried the back door. Same thing. The garage door code I'd had for 9 years no longer worked. I stood in my driveway for a moment. My car was there. My hands were steady. I called Miles. He answered after 3 rings, groggy. I told him my key wasn't working. He was quiet for a second, and then he said, yeah, Adrian thought it would be a good idea to have the locks changed. For security. Just like that. For security. Like that was a sentence a person could say. I asked if he understood what he was telling me. He said, Mom, it's just... And then he said something about how this would give everyone more privacy while they sorted out the transition, and that I could knock and someone would let me in. I could knock at my own front door, and someone would let me in. My son said that to me. Here's what I did not do. I did not scream at him. I did not cry. I did not bang on that door. Here is what I did. I got in my car and I drove to a 24-hour diner on Battleground Avenue called May's, and I ordered eggs and toast and coffee, and I sat in that booth and I called Louise at 7:15 in the morning. She answered because she is that kind of friend and that kind of attorney. She said, Cecile, listen to me carefully. You have not been out of that house for 30 days. You have not signed anything. They changed the locks on a property that is solely in your name. Here is what you are going to do. I want to explain why I didn't knock on the door. I want to explain it because apparently it is the thing people find hardest to understand when they hear this story. Why didn't you just go back and make them let you in? Because Adrian was counting on exactly that. She wanted the confrontation. She wanted me desperate and undignified on my own front porch so she could document it somehow, frame it somehow, use it somehow. I've seen it done. I've seen it done. In divorce cases, in estate disputes, in restraining order hearings, I knew what she was setting up, and I decided she wasn't going to get it. I drove home at 9:15 the next morning. I had spent the night at Betty's. Betty had made up her guest room without asking a single question, handed me a glass of sweet tea, and sat with me on her porch until I felt like myself again. I called my son Thomas, Robert's brother's boy, 29, built like a linebacker, and asked if he'd come with me in the morning. He was there at 9. I had a locksmith meet us at the house, a licensed locksmith, as Louise had instructed, with documentation of property ownership in hand. The locksmith changed all the locks while Thomas stood in the driveway. The whole process took about 22 minutes. Miles and Adrian were both inside. I could hear them moving around in there, talking fast and low. At one point, Miles opened the upstairs window and said, Mom, what are you doing? I looked up and I said, I'm having my locks replaced on my property, Miles. You're welcome to come down. He didn't come down. When the locksmith was finished, I let myself in with my new key. I stood in my foyer for a moment. The framed photo of Robert and me was back in the linen closet. I took it out and hung it where it belonged. Then I went to work. I called Louise again from the kitchen. She walked me through everything. That morning, with Thomas's help, I moved Miles and Adrian's belongings from every room they'd been using. Their clothes, their toiletries, the Bluetooth speaker. The things from the guest bathroom, the items Adrian had gradually distributed around my house, into the 2 large suitcases they'd come with, plus a half-dozen cardboard boxes I'd bought at the UPS store, and I carried all of it onto the covered porch. Neatly, everything folded. I wasn't there to destroy their things. I was there to make something clear. I left a letter on top of the first box. Thomas had witnessed me write it. It said that the arrangement had ended as of that date, that their belongings were on the porch, that they were welcome to collect them, and that if they had not vacated the premises by 5 o'clock that evening, Louise would be filing a formal unlawful detainer notice, and that the changing of the locks on a property they did not own and held no legal claim to would be referenced in that filing. I then went and sat in my kitchen and made myself a cup of coffee. Miles came downstairs about 10 minutes later. He looked at me across the kitchen, and he had the grace to look ashamed. I think, somewhere in him, he had known what Adrian was doing and had told himself a story about why it was okay, and now the story had run out. He stood there for a long time, not saying anything. I said, "I love you, Miles. I will always love you, but this is my house, and what happened yesterday will not happen again." He said, "I know, Mom." Adrian came downstairs a while later. She looked at me with the expression of someone who had gambled and was pretending they hadn't lost. She said something about how this was an overreaction. I said very calmly, "Your things are on the porch, sweetheart." Then I picked up my crossword puzzle. They were gone by 2:30. I sat on my back porch that evening with a glass of sweet tea and looked at my yard, my garden, Robert's bird feeder that I've kept filled for 7 years, the old magnolia in the corner that blooms every April without fail. Everything exactly where it belonged. My phone rang. It was Miles. I let it ring. I wasn't ready. I would call him back when I was ready, and not a moment before. Later that night, sitting at the same kitchen table where I've sat through 31 years of this life, I thought about something I'd heard from a judge once. Years ago, in a courtroom I was working in. She was ruling on a property dispute between siblings, and she said, "Silence is not the same as consent, and patience is not the same as permission." I had been patient for a long time. I had been quiet for a long time. I'd cooked around allergies and moved my things and smiled in photographs wearing the color I was told to wear. And then I stopped. There's a woman in my church named Georgia. She's 71, lost her husband 2 years ago, has a daughter and a son-in-law who've been eyeing her house the same way I saw Adrian looking at mine. I had coffee with her last week. I told her what happened. She listened without interrupting, and at the end she was very quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't know you could do that." I told her, "You can. You find out what your rights are, you document what's happening, you don't let embarrassment or guilt or love convince you to hand over what is yours. Love is not a lease agreement. Love is not a deed transfer. Love is not a deed transfer. Love is something you give freely, not something someone takes by changing the locks." Miles and I are talking now. Slowly. It's hard. He's apologized, more than once, for what Adrian did and for his own silence, which amounted to the same thing in the end. We're not where we were. I don't know if we'll get there, but I know the conversation we're having now is more honest than most of the ones we had before, and that has to count for something. Adrian has not called. I put the ceramic rooster back in its spot by the kitchen window last week, and I looked at it for a while. It's a small thing, painted clay, a little chipped on the beak where Miles dropped it when he was 9, but it was Estelle's, Robert's mother's, and it belongs right there where I can see it every morning. Nobody is moving it again. I've thought a lot about why things unfolded the way they did. Not to relitigate it, not to make myself feel righteous about it, but because I genuinely believe that what happens to us is usually connected, in ways we don't always see until we're standing on the other side of it, to the choices we made before. When I said yes to Miles and Adrian moving in, I meant it with my whole heart. That was the right thing to do. A mother opens her door. But somewhere between that first yes and the morning I found myself locked out of my own house, I had said yes too many times to too many small things that didn't deserve a yes. The toaster moved and I let it go. The rooster went to the high shelf and I let it go. The album of Robert and me ended up face down in a closet and I let that go too. I told myself I was being gracious. I told myself that's what love looks like: accommodation, patience, keeping the peace. But there's a difference between grace and erasure, and I let the line between them get blurry. What I know now is that every time I moved on without saying anything, I was teaching Adrienne something. I was teaching her that the boundaries of this house were negotiable, that I was the kind of woman who would fold quietly. She drew her conclusions from my behavior. And, in a strange way, she wasn't wrong. Not at first. I had been folding. I just hadn't fully realized it until the key stopped turning in my own front door. That morning was humiliating in a way I don't have clean words for. 63 years old, standing in my housecoat in the driveway, calling my son to ask why I couldn't get into my house. But I'll tell you something I didn't expect. The humiliation didn't break me. It clarified me. Everything I'd been pushing down for months. The discomfort, the slow anger, the grief of watching my son defer to a woman who was systematically disrespecting his mother. All of it came into focus in about 30 seconds, and I got very calm. That calm is what I'm most proud of. Not the locksmith, not the boxes on the porch. The calm, because calm is what allowed me to think instead of react, to call Louise instead of bang on the door, to give myself one night at Betty's house to be sure that what I did next was deliberate and not desperate. Desperation is loud. It makes mistakes. What I needed was to be quiet and precise. I think about Miles a lot these days. I think about the boy who used to fall asleep on the couch watching baseball with his father. And I think about the man who sat on my porch in July and used the phrase "as you get older," like I was already somewhere diminished. He's not a bad person, but he made a bad choice. Actually, he made a long series of small bad choices, and they added up to something that hurt me in a way I won't forget easily. That's how it usually works. It's rarely one big betrayal. It's 100 small surrenders disguised as keeping the peace. What I want anyone to take from this, and I mean this especially if you're a woman my age or any age, is that your home is not a compromise. Your name on a deed means something. Your comfort in your own kitchen means something. And if someone, anyone, is slowly making you feel like a guest in your own life, you are allowed to notice that. You are allowed to name it. And you are allowed to act. I am not a hard woman. I cried in my car the night I left, but I got up the next morning and I did what needed doing, quietly and without cruelty, and I went home. That's what I'd tell Georgia. That's what I'd tell anyone. You don't have to be loud to be strong. You just have to be sure.